Welcome back to SoulNet, friends. We are happy to be here, and this is our third and final interview series. Today, we have Islena Faircrest, and we are going to be talking to Islena about just the changes that she's had in her life, what's led her down her career path, and just how many hats that she's worn in her 50 years of her life so far. It's so inspirational to know that we are never too old to try new things. So let's get started.
Yes, let's do it. Let's do it. I'm ready.
The many hats of Islena. We love each and every hat that you wear. Now, the one that I'm really curious about is one of your earlier days, you were actually a doula as well. Can you tell us a little bit about how that came to be and some of your experiences there?
Yes, I did when my kids were little. Well, I was all about births and babies and prenatal education, and a big movement actually in the States in the early 2000s was mothers clubs. I noticed it wasn't as predominant in Canada, but mothers clubs were like a social a support for mothers of young children. And I was quite involved in that as well. At that time frame when my kids were little, I was all about the first years last forever, kind of like infant and toddler and family development. Now, what I really appreciate of that time frame in my life is that it's like a foundational setting for the rest of life. This is the ironic part, because I work with people with trauma, is that so much imprinting happens that is not accessible through memory, because we don't remember much of what happened as adults. We don't remember too much of what happens before 5, and certainly not much of what happens before 3. Most of us can't. So what I notice helps is I work with clients in the realm of imagination, because imagination is the first few steps towards intuition. Because they're like, I don't know, and I'm not intuitive. I don't, there's a lot of I don't know. So it's in inviting them into like felt senses of stuff. Like, so, okay, well, let's visualize you in your time frame of toddlerhood, or visualize yourself in utero. Imagine the sounds of your family at that time. So they're like accessing something that's deeper than the surface level stuff. They're imagining their parents when they were in utero, like what was the dynamic, what was the family dynamic. And so that whole stage of life of like birth, right after birth, conception, in utero, really fascinated me at that time.
Can I just share too that I was with a group of kindergarten kids who are like 6 years old this week, and along the lines of what you're doing in your work, it just reminds me, because I was so deeply touched by a couple of these little kids and their offerings. We talked about courage and when they've had to be courageous. And one of them put up her hand and she said, I had to be courageous when I took my first step.
Wow.
And then that led to another little girl saying, I had to be courageous when I shared my first word.
Oh, wow.
And I had to stop, because I realized in that moment that as an adult, like, we forget how courage is just in us. And another little boy said, I have to be courageous when I'm creative.
Wow.
I was like, that was the greatest gift, because what that shows us, to your point, is that when we are young and unfiltered, like we haven't really kind of been hurt by the world. We haven't been humiliated. We haven't been embarrassed. We haven't been told that we're not good enough. We are in that place. We remember what courage is.
Yeah.
So you're in your line of work. I'd love to hear more about how you, maybe even your own experience in life, being, raised by a tiger mama, being performative, like how this informs what you offer your clients now.
Yeah.
Because it sounds like you're doing really great work.
Well, You just spoke perfectly to the hero's journey of coming back home to our kind of like original soul. And that in our lifetime, our soul takes on these kind of quests that are painful and filled with trials and tribulations and adversity. And each kind of adversity and cycle of challenge and trial and tribulation that we go through, the soul does get stained. And I wouldn't say permanently, but it gets like a car that's been in a few accidents, a dent here, a bit there. Like my soul has many dents. And I'm not sure if they can pop back out. I mean, we do the practices to try and help those dents pop back out. But what I notice is that there's a few like peak moments in life of like our own development pushes the soul to like do more growth. Well, toddlerhood, because toddlerhood is like your neurology is just exploding with the world, realizing there's a world around you, and individuating from the parent just a little bit in toddlerhood. And then adolescence, which is the bigger individuation, and then young adulthood, where you actually are individuated from the family, and you're like now facing the barrage of like, holy shit, I'm responsible for myself. And then midlife, the midlife quote unquote crisis, I really feel is more of an awakening, where we finally have the faculties and the resources to question our conditioning and complete, in a way, the soul's journey of expansion and growth.
Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. Exactly. Because it's not everyone's it's not
Right.
everyone's bailiwick. Many of us are here now to be cycle breakers and kind of like burst through and try to find our genuine soul language and express that for the remainder of our lives, and help generations, our younger generations, including children if we have them, do that. I've noticed there's no other stage in my life, even though I left home at 16 and did all kinds of stuff that was kind of mavericky. I've noticed that's my life has been very like, I just kind of take the risks that many don't. And it's just been the theme of my life, is that the midlife has been a stage that has required tons of courage for reinventing after my divorce, reinventing myself, starting from the ground zero financially, where I observed a lot of my friends were already set. I was starting from ground zero. This is talk about imposter syndrome, which we'll get to later. And just really questioning my capacity, my identity, and reinventing and requiring courage where I often felt I didn't have enough courage.
I love that point that you make, because courage, it's almost like we forget how courageous we've had to be.
Yeah.
And then we become adults and we think we know everything, and we forget that we have to be courageous to make new friends. We have to be courageous to try something new, or
to take risks.
Yeah.
Let go of something. Like letting go is just as important as what we bring into our lives. Often it's the things that we hang on to and cling to that are doing us the most detriment or keeping us where we are, right? So it's what we bring in, but equally so what we can let go of. And that's really hard. I think that's why we see this time of life, so many relationships breaking down too, right? It's like, what are you choosing? Is that still working for you? Well, maybe not.
Midlife wakes us up to the unconscious patterns that are no longer working.
You totally
big time.
Yeah.
Hence why so much breaks down.
Well, and I feel like we do, either we go into it or we go into avoidance, which is where we see like the fancy cars and the new updated girlfriends or boyfriends or like that kind of stuff, or we go into ourselves.
Ooh, updated boyfriends. That sounds fun.
Totally.
I think I'm really curious about the career choice, the career path that you've taken, Islena. Like I think of you when we were like 15, 16. And now, of course, as an adult, we know more about your life at that time, that you were there was a lot of pressure. There was a lot of pressure to be perfect, to perform. We also knew you like as, very high achieving, but also very joyful. I just want to say that, like, we did feel your joy and your kindness.
Thank you.
I just am fascinated. And I feel like maybe some of our listeners too, that also were raised to be more performative and,
Mm.
high achieving. How did that guide you and lead you into your path of becoming a yoga instructor, a teacher, a coach?
Great question. Yeah. So in terms of the yoga journey, it actually came from when I had kids. I felt like really stiff and my body was just tight and in pain. And I remembered when I was a kid that I did yoga. I was exposed to yoga in grade one. My school had a was it my grade one teacher? I think she was my grade one teacher. I believe I have her to thank. Uh, she was a hippie. Yeah, she was a
That's
hippie. She was
amazing.
awesome, loved her. And she taught us kids yoga. And I remember even the book, it was like with drawings that were really child friendly. So we could look at them because we couldn't read very well in grade one and kind of follow the drawings and she would put on the Beatles, "Here Comes the Sun," do 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 do, and we would do
Oh, love
sun
it.
salutations to that song, and it just felt so organic and
So
natural.
good.
I really enjoyed it, and I was really good at yoga because I was also in gymnastics because I was the prodigy child of a tiger mom. So I was doing Chinese
Yeah,
dance, tap,
totally.
ballet, jazz, toe, yoga, and gymnastics. Yeah. So how many fingers do I have? I was pretty much doing
Wow.
everything as a kid.
Wow.
My cousins used to say like, "Wow, it's crazy how much stuff you're doing," and I didn't even know I had an option. That's the thing. That was my conditioning. It was just expected of me, right? I never realized I had the ability to question until I became a teenager, and then the shit hit the fan. But I was
No, I feel like that's a really common thing for a lot of my friends of, traditional kind of Chinese families, especially like the kids are in every activity from math camp. I remember I have a good friend I played volleyball with, and I'd be like, "So when does Alex get to play with his friends? Because he's got everything else booked in his summer
he
holiday."
doesn't
And
get
it's
to.
like, he's like, "That's not how it rolls in our house."
Exactly. There's no playing. Yeah. Yeah.
No.
Yeah, no, it's
Everything with a purpose is what I'm hearing, right? Like everything
yeah,
was, you were supposed to have this skill set that would enable you to be out in the
yeah.
world as whoever your mother wanted you to be,
Yes,
maybe?
and to my mom's credit, it's a classic case of having your child experience everything you didn't get to, right? I'm a classic case of that. My mom, being a girl, didn't get the education that her brothers did. This is the traditional kind of patriarchal hierarchy in the traditional Chinese family. So my mom really wanted to learn dance and the arts growing up, and she didn't have access to it. So she put it on me, but in the kind of traditional Chinese way of
Yeah.
expectations. And I see her good intentions. It's ancestral trauma of, having your kids make up for your own voids and the way of doing it. It's the behaviors of the way of doing it, right? It creates more trauma if there's force, if there isn't that, what would I call it, a natural balance of allowing your child to have curiosity, but you also guiding them, right?
Sounds like your mom was actually trying to be a bit of a
She
cycle breaker
was. You're
in her
absolutely
own right.
right. Yeah,
But
yeah, she really
yeah,
was. She was trying to, she shared with me stories where she had tried to go to dance and she was curious about it, but no, she had to work instead, and the money that she made went towards a family, and just a immigrant family, just trying to make it and survive, and all the kids, when the money they make goes to the parents, and it all goes towards the family, but there's a
yeah,
lot of servitude there. And in a way, this is often the conundrum of immigrant families, is that the parents grow up in another culture and then they immigrate somewhere, and the kids grow up in the new culture that questions the old country, and this is often the battle and the clash of immigrant families. The parents actually hold on to the old school values even stronger because when they came to the new place, there's their experiences like, oh, we got to fit in, or don't do this wrong, or don't do that wrong. So they hold on to the old values even stronger. Whereas those that remained back home, they get to evolve in society. And so that's what's missing often for immigrant cultures, is they become more conservative because they have to fit in and to try and make life work. That's what certainly happened in my family. I was the first mixed race kid in my family, and I think just the very act of my being, of my existence, questioned the whole, the way everything was done and seen. Yeah. So I was often,
Wow.
I was often the odd one, so to speak.
I'm thinking about Dana's comment about your mom being a cycle breaker in her own right. And then
Yes.
she married a
Yep.
white man
A
from
guaylo,
Canada.
which means white ghost.
Okay. So she was like a rebel.
Mm-hmm.
This is where you get your rebellious, maybe.
Bingo. Yeah. But my mom would never own her rebellious.
No.
Interesting.
But you're right. You're absolutely right.
Beautiful.
Yep.
I love that connection. Okay, so going back to yoga, I love this grade 1 teacher. Like, I just want to say a shout out to the grade 1 teachers that have so much on their plate. So you're good at yoga.
I have my kids. Yeah. Then I have my kids and I'm like, oh, I need that again. A friend of mine owned a yoga studio and I happened to be, I did massage therapy at the time. I provided
another hat.
I forgot about that.
Can we just have a lineup of hats that Eileen just keeps putting on?
About that. I think we've now covered all of them.
Oh my gosh, you are amazing. You're like the modern day Mad Hatter. Like, you've got
totally.
You've got all the hats.
So I provided massage therapy at the time, and 90% of my clients were, I should say 80% of my clients were pregnant women. So I was teaching prenatal education as well. And a friend of mine who owned a yoga studio who was offering prenatal yoga, she's like, can you teach the prenatal education component in my prenatal yoga classes? It would just enhance the whole experience. I was like, sure. So I brought that into her classes. It went really well. And she's like, why don't you just teach the yoga as well? I was like, okay.
Love it.
So it organically evolved from that. Prenatal yoga. And then I was like, well, I might as well get certified for this. It brought back all the memories of the, yoga I did in elementary school at Garibaldi Elementary in East Vancouver, because I'm an East Van kid. Woot, woot. At least I was growing up. And then this East Van kid went to West Van. It was like, what? Cultural shock. And the only reason I went there,
syndrome.
Bingo. And why did I go? The baccalaureate program, right? The international IB program, which my tiger mom put me into. I remember crying.
Because she was also smart.
Yeah. Well, I don't know.
You're smart too.
I remember crying when my mom was like, okay, you're going to West Van for the IB program. I'm like, but all my friends are going here. Doesn't matter. You're going there. And I was like, I ended up taking a yoga teacher training program and then just kind of evolved from there, and then ended up, after years of teaching, bought into a yoga studio with a friend of mine. So we taught yoga teacher trainings. And what I noticed is when I was teaching yoga teacher trainings, the journey of training people to become yoga teachers brought up my natural predisposition to the world of psychology and helping people get to understand themselves better. I mean, what was my favorite subject in high school? Psychology. I loved it. Remember, you guys might remember our psych teacher's name. Beautiful Asian lady who did her face beautifully with makeup. Like she looked perfectly coiffed every time she arrived in class. I'll remember that. But she brought in a guest speaker once. He stayed with us, I think, for 2 days or 2 classes, and talked about the impact of his childhood from abuse and sexual abuse. And it was the first time I heard somebody, I think I was maybe 15 at the time. It was the first time I heard somebody speak so candidly about domestic, violence basically in the home.
Well, and to be clear, like we're talking about like 30 some odd years ago, right? Like that they're talking openly about this. If we think about that in context of this stuff was like, don't ask, don't tell, right? It wasn't being, especially in a school.
Yeah. It was huge.
Because it was kind of like a hush culture.
Exactly. Yeah. And at the end of his 2-day presentation, he handed out phone numbers to all the kids. He said, if you have any problems, you just call this number. And I remember the next week, my mom and I got into this big argument. And I was at my wit's end. And I called the number. I talked to him. I was like, these are the problems I'm going. And It was actually
No
his
way.
number.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
And I remember just
Can we look him up?
I
I want
know,
to know who he
right?
is.
I
Is he still
know. And
alive?
Wow.
it's like these adults that provide lifelines. Like that was probably the first time I'd ever really felt seen and heard for what I was going through that I couldn't share. Not even in my own family, not with anybody. And it just felt safe to reach out, and I did. And he's like, the magic that he provided was an empathic ear. Like he could just hear my sorrow. He could hear, like, he wasn't really like, what could you do? Like not much he could do, but he really listened, and I could just kind of pour my sorrow of like feeling like I was completely helpless and powerless. And that's kind of when I decided to leave home. Being able to have someone listen compassionately to the pain I was experiencing helped me kind of like pull something together in myself. The courage,
Courage.
The courage. I
the
was thinking the same thing.
courage.
That was your
It was my
courage
courage
moment.
moment.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Wow.
yep.
Wow.
So I'm kind of putting these pieces together of like why I'm in psychology now. And like it was absolutely a soul journey for
Yeah.
me to become a therapist.
So then, when you were offering yoga teacher training, can you just go back to what that brought up in you
Yes,
that
yeah.
reminded you of this like love of psychology?
Yes. Well, when in my yoga teacher trainings, what I noticed is people were going through a process in the training. And I would sometimes lead trainings that were stretched out over half a year, or sometimes lead a training that was intensive over like a summer. And the summer intensive ones, because we saw each other a lot more frequently, it was like they signed up for a quest because they come in, as a certain way, and then they go through this process of like unraveling their identity. And because yoga teacher training also covers the history of yoga and the philosophy of yoga. So you're taking on all this like ancient Vedic philosophy that is about the soul journey and about the journey of the soul evolving in this lifetime, and how do we evolve through challenges. And so it brings up everyone's unprocessed stuff in their life, and they're like, oh, this is not just a yoga teacher training, this is a soul training. Oh. And that is what turned into me taking more personal development training for coaching. And then the coaching led to the trauma informed therapy. Yeah. So it's been so like one thing presents the next thing and that is needed for me to meet the needs of the people that are in my kind of sphere. And then the needs of those people directs the next thing that I need to learn to meet the needs as it expands.
So would you say there's also an aspect of your own growth that's allowed you to do this deeper and more? Because your work started, we won't say yoga's surface, but it's simple. And then going deeper into the tissues and the trauma work is a whole nother level. And it feels like that requires you to be continuing to go into those deeper levels of yourself.
Yes, 100%. And I would say probably the biggest thing that informed the trauma-informed coaching that I provide is the trauma I experienced during my divorce. And it was like a complete breaking open of my old identity. Because remember, I'd been trained with servitude, that conditioning, right?
Yeah.
So that cracked open my identity at the time. And it was a big, like, who am I moment. It wasn't really a moment, it was a process. And again, to unlearn old patterning and conditioning, we have to plant new programming and patterns, because otherwise the old patterning just stays there. We can't actually get rid of anything without planting in the new. Otherwise the old just keeps surfacing, because then the brain works by default, right? So it required me to challenge so much. And I had many moments of like, maybe identity confusion. Like, who am I as I let go of all this old stuff? Like, is this working? I had many moments of, is this working? Am I pushing, the box too far or the boundaries too far? But I seem to have found the career choice in all of this different hats, as you guys have described it, seems to have really landed at a place where it works.
I'm so inspired. Such an inspiring journey. And guess what? You're only 50. Oh, so that means there's more
Just getting
hats.
started.
I'm actually pretty good with the hats I have now. I think, yeah.
Exactly. I love it.
Sounds like the hats that are meant to be worn next will show up along the path too, if we just kind of trust that based on what you've shared.
Very true. That's a good point. Yeah, because the future is unknown. Good point, Dayna. Good point. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I welcome whatever hats come in the future.
So we're going to go into our rapid fire with Islena.
A little soul to soul.
I'm going to kick it off with, I think, because this is just like so rebellious. Lacy or racy?
Oh boy. So right now at this stage of life at 50, it's all about comfort.
That's fair.
And I'll look at my lacy and racy stuff. I'll be like, wow, that's really cool, but I won't put it on.
Which book of yours is dog-eared and highlighted the most?
Right now it's No Bad Parts by Dr. Richard Schwartz. Yeah. Basically that there are no bad parts in our system. They're just born out of necessity at the time, and they just need the loving presence of our current functional adult inner parent.
Okay, so what song best describes you?
Oh gosh, it takes me a moment to feel into this one. Doon, 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 doon. Can't touch this. Doon, doon, doon,
Can't touch this.
I just kind of
We are children of the 90s.
Completely.
The other question we have for you is like, I feel like this is, as a yoga teacher, maybe this is how you decompress, but maybe there's another way that you decompress. Like, what's your favorite way to decompress?
Right now, it's sitting on the patio and looking at the trees and watching the wind move through the leaves. And I notice I connect to the sky a lot. I'm Vata in Ayurvedic medicine, so I'm very like air, sky. And fortunately, my yoga practice connects me to the earth. But yeah, I love watching the wind move the trees, and then my gaze goes up to the horizon and the sky, and that's where I feel like the lifting of energy, because otherwise with the work I do, there's a lot of compression and heaviness, a lot of energetic heaviness with other people's traumas, and I notice going to the horizon, the sky helps to lift all that and recycle the energy.
Lovely. Messages to your younger self, anything you'd like to tell that younger side of you?
Oh yes. Wow. Yes, I would tell her that there is a future relationship in her life where she really finds that beautiful soulmate and secure attachment style that is so rewarding that she's been looking forward to her whole life. And that in this relationship, you'll finally have the freedom to be yourself, and you'll have freedom to feel whole as yourself. So it would be like, hang in there, kiddo, because it's gonna be a really frickin' bumpy ride on the way there. It'll be bumpy, but you'll make it. You'll face the biggest challenges where you feel that you might not make it, but you will make it. I would encourage myself. Yeah, you'll make it through.
Ride through those bumps. I do have one final question I'd love for you to share with our listeners. What called you to connect with Megan and I?
It's funny. I had this vision for a few years, and it was kind of like more like a mind's eye vision. It wasn't like, oh, I want to do this. It was more to just show up in my creativity of like, wouldn't it be cool if you reconnected with some high school people to just share about your journey since? And it just was always there. And it came from this place of like, it would be an opportunity for us to reflect on ourselves, of who we were when we were younger and what we were all going through. and to normalize the challenges we were going through at the time, to normalize them. And for me, a theme in my life has often been like a coming together. I have this tendency to bring things or people together, and it's my way of like providing healing. So I think it was younger me wanting to heal through interpersonal relationship with others that from that time frame. And so you guys hold a special place in my heart of accessing like the unscathed parts of our soul from our childhood that are like genuinely playful and fun and loving, and addressing also the younger parts that experience the pain and need kind of our help, you know? And that's really what had me call and reconnect with you guys and just like kind of invite that let's get together and just share.
Well, we're so grateful you did, because you were the starting point of bringing us all together.
Thank you.
Over a few visits, here we are.
Yeah, thank you so much. Wow, what a special call that was.
Who would have thought that we'd be here now with this? This is so cool.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So I just want to end it with you'll make it. We're going to make it, baby. We're going to make it.
We're going to make it.
Just like Mary Tyler Moore, our theme song was something along those lines. You're going to make it after all.
Yeah, you're right.
Like, I can see her and she throws her hat up in the air.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Yeah,
And we'll throw our multiple hats.
Yes.
Multiple hats.
That would be amazing. That would be amazing. You're going to make it after all, SoulNet.
Okay.
I love it. That's it. That's a wrap.
That's a wrap.
And that is the last of our SoulNet sister interviews. We hope that you've enjoyed learning a little bit more about all three of us. Next time on the pod, we're going to talk about imposter syndrome. It's a collective thing that I think we all experience at one point in our lives. So tune in next time as we share some stories about our experiences in dealing with these feelings of not quite measuring up. Bye for now. Thanks for listening into SoulNet, everybody. If you liked what you heard here today on the podcast, please follow, like, and share. If you have topics you'd like us to cover here on the net, email us at soulnetsisters@gmail.com.